Right, for those of you who weren't at my session this morning, why not? Because it was an amazing panel. My name's Liz Whitefield. As you can probably tell, I'm not from the USA. I am from the north of England, which is the best part of the UK. You'll have met lots of people from London as well. So I'm singing the praises of the north of England. And I have the privilege of hosting the panel today. And it's been an absolutely amazing day, actually. So I'm going to do a bit of the housekeeping for us first. And then we're going to get on with the exciting stuff and meet this amazing panel we've got this afternoon. So as part of the moderation, we're going to start by, I'm going to introduce the panel when I sit down eventually. I'm going to ask a few questions to get them warmed up. They don't need it. I've met them all. Trust me, this is going to be great. And then we're going to, within about 20 minutes, it's straight to you in the audience. So think about the things you want to ask. I'd ask you to keep the question really clear and clean. It's great to get the context and perspective, but I want to get as much time out of these people as we possibly can. So in terms of asking a question, say who you are, what your role, where you work, and then ask your question, please. I appreciate that. And then just to remind media representatives that might be here or not, that obviously they're not asking questions in these groups because they get a chance to do that elsewhere as well. Okay, so I think we know that this session really is about, it's one of the reasons why we're here today, actually. So we're going to get into that in a moment. But first of all, the panel. I'd like to introduce Andy Lewandowski, I got it right, the Chief Digital Experience Officer for the Department of the Interior in the US. And then we have Lauren Alexanderson, who's a Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs in the US. Everybody's from the US, why am I saying that? Amira Boland, the Federal Customer Experience Office, lead Office of Management and Budget, Executive Office of the President of the United States. This is quite impressive for me, I have to say, in terms of people I'm meeting today. And then we have the sponsor for the panel, Tim Pados, who's the Vice President of the Global Public Sector Mission Solutions for ServiceNow. You'll have seen his team outside as well in regards to that. Paul Wagner, Chief Executive Officer for the Canadian Digital Service, and Traci Walker, the Executive Director of the Digital Services Coalition of the US. So an amazing panel, and thank you all for This is like the sleepy session sometimes when people want to go home, but this is going to be really exciting, I think, genuinely. One of the reasons we're here today, really, is the report that was architected back in 2023 around digitising and modernising government, and we're very fortunate to have one of the main architects of that report here. So I want Andy to open up and just open up the session and just give us a little bit of background as to why that happened and what that came about. I know you think you've moved on since then, but please, if you can, just for the audience, it's a good opportunity for the audience to hear it from you.
Sure, and I will caveat before answering, I no longer work at the Office of Management and Budget. I did make a move earlier to the U.S. Department of the Interior, and today I learned that the Interior Department in other countries means Homeland Security and defense. That's not what my agency does. We manage more than 500 million federal lands. We manage the largest high-impact service provider in the federal government, which is the National Park Service. And we also provide benefits and services to 1.9 million American Indians and more than 500 tribal nations. So we are nicknamed the Department of, quote, everything else, unquote. So,
best place to work.
So no longer at OMB, but happy to talk about my experiences there. So as many of you know, 5.5 years ago, the US Congress passed into law the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act, also called the 21st Century IDEA. And the real point of the law was to say that digital is now the default way that the public comes to government for information, for services, for benefits, for programs. And we should work a little bit harder, maybe a little bit faster, work in more novel ways to digitize as much of the public experience as possible. What I love about the law is it also said that government has to continue to be accessible to all people. And so all of our information and services have to continue to be provided in at least one traditional channel. The most common ways that we provide information and services in the non-digital ways are through call centers, through field offices, still a lot of paper, and some people still prefer paper, and that's okay. So the Office of Management and Budget conveniently rode on the coattails of the cultural change that we saw with the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So the consumer app companies really turbocharged their efforts, right? The ways that we engaged in daily life, in work, in school, all relied even more on technology. And so we suddenly found ourselves in the place where the majority of the population was now okay with ordering groceries online and tracking the delivery of those groceries while they're at the office or while they're on their way to pick up their kids. So one of the questions that my former colleague Amira and I always got is, why did it take so long to get this out? And my answer is, I don't think we were ready.
Yeah.
We weren't ready for this vision of digital as the default, and the majority of people will interact with government online and from the mobile phones in their pockets.
Amazing. Thank you. And actually, so it'd be interesting to hear, Lauren, from yourself, and then probably get Paul's perspective on what's actually happening now and where you're seeing the impacts of transformation and how it's supporting public servants and then ultimately customers and citizens.
Absolutely. I like to say that we are in the business of silo obfuscation with a goal of silo bashing in the Department of Veterans Affairs. And what I mean by that, right, is that we've learned for years that veterans and their care teams don't want to need to know how the machinery works in order to figure out how to access and manage their benefits. And we've started with a website. We had va.gov. Actually, Andy and I worked together on va.gov. We now have the VA Health and Benefits application. And one of the things that my team is working on right now is building a patient portal that recognizes that we're talking about veterans who also happen to get benefits and don't necessarily want to have to figure out which EHR, which data system their data lives in to figure out how to send a message to their doctor. And the thing that is sort of brought into this and is baked into all of the work that we do now is that we not only design with veterans, but we're also designing with veterans in a way that is very accessibility forward. We're making sure that we are designing with those that are going to have the hardest time using digital technology to make sure that that is baked into the concepts of things that we build, and that they are giving us feedback throughout every step, that we are thinking about the end-to-end services, the way veterans and their care teams access things. So it's not just veterans, but it's their dependents, it's their caregivers, it's their beneficiaries, it's also their doctors too, which is another big part, sort of new area that we're moving into a lot more. So I'm thrilled that human-centered design has just sort of become this thing that we do, and I am excited to hear from my colleague in Canada.
Yeah.
Awesome. I noticed you always put the Canadian in the same seat, so I'm not sure if there's something with that, but I know Scott Jones was sitting here, so yeah.
I need to be able to see Paul, apparently.
And so by round of applause, how many of you think I'm going to knock this water over by the end of the session? Okay.
If you don't, I will.
Yeah. That was just to get a little bit of the blood flowing in the room after lunch. So listen, absolute pleasure to be here, and I think a lot of the similar sort of journeys as we think about digital transformation, and some of the things. And I was going to say siloization, and I thought I had the silo word, but you kind of nailed me. There was silo obfuscation.
I like
Love
that.
it.
But when you think about, and I think it was Tom Reed that said it in the last session, the way government has been designed and is designed today, certainly in Canada, it was designed before the 1900s. And so when you think about the mandates and the missions of each of those organizations, they're set up to deliver their vertical. So we structure that from a leadership perspective, from a design perspective, from a technology perspective. And the loser in all of this is the client. They become the intermediary of all the different patchwork of services, service expectations, and the like. And so we need to do better from that respect. And I think, one of the other things that we talked about in previous sessions was around the storytelling and basically thinking about things through life journeys, which necessarily crosses departments. The only thing that we have to be careful of is it can't cross all departments. And if you try to do something for whole of government, typically fails. And if you want to spend some time after this session, I can give you some examples from Canada where that's been spectacular. I may talk about some of them up here, we'll see. But I do think, if we need to start thinking about client segmentation and thinking about what does a segment of a client or segment of the client population need, because the people who are looking to use government services to book their campsite through Parks Canada don't necessarily want to have the same level of transaction when it comes to a death in their family, or if they're lost their job. So I think we really need to be really specific about that. And then the onus is on us as bureaucrats in the room to tell that story to the policymakers, to the politicians, in a way that crosses lines, and that's crosses ministerial lines. That's hard because themselves, they're looking at their vertical. But I think digital provides us the opportunity to actually have that narrative across those organizations. And that's where we're starting to see some wins in Canada. Not many. Scott Jones also pointed out that we haven't been very successful in Canada in some of these spaces. And he's absolutely right, because it's pervasive. Even when we try at the working level to start to work across organizations, when push comes to shove, that verticalness, that siloization kicks in pretty hard. And so I think that's one of the things we need to break down. And it's not a, in my mind, it's not a digital transformation, it's a culture transformation that's underpinned with digital.
Yeah, and that's an interesting theme, I think, that resonated from earlier on today. And actually, just to dig a little bit deeper on, like, why is now the right time? And what is it about what's happening at the moment that's helping to open the door for transformation? I'll start with Amira, then Tim, if that's all right, to get your perspective.
Sure. So as many of y'all may know, we just had this past fall, we had the 5-year anniversary of our first ever federal government customer experience guidance, 5-year anniversary, which we actually put out in the previous administration. And then we had, of course, the 2-year anniversary of the President's executive order on customer experience that was signed by President Biden in this administration. And I think what we're seeing here is that as much work as there is to be done, I feel like we're less pitching why this is important. Yes. And that we're sort of over that hump of convincing people that digital experience matters, that customer trust and relationship building matters, that designing with users is like a thing that you should do. And there's still people that need to be convinced, but it's less so. And we've had the voice of the president say you shouldn't have to know how to know. Yeah. And that was a really important line that he said when he was signing the executive order and had members of his cabinet behind him, because he wanted to show that he was going to be holding his leaders accountable for their service delivery. And I think that this has obviously been a decades-long effort. It was obviously picked up a lot of steam in the Obama administration with the establishment of the U.S. Digital Service and many of these different technology components that we now have in the U.S. government. And so that capacity building started. We're obviously in a much better place than we were there. We have the right job descriptions classified at all of the agencies. We're starting to align resources to that talent, slow but steady. Obviously, like, there wasn't a chief technology officer at the VA 16 years ago. And so I think we have this moment where we've gotten there were these proof points of projects that happened that prove things were possible, right? Like, look at what happens when you don't design with users or you don't build in an agile way, like you have a healthcare.gov, and then we go in and we fix it, and we've since learned from that. We now have a framework that we can continue to attach and helps that flywheel of, like, a good project happens and there's like a process, part of the machinery. Like, another lesson of my government time is that you can't fight the machinery, you just have to build your thing into the machinery. And so now we've done that, and then we had this like top-down leadership mandate. And so and we've got some capacity now in agencies. And so those 4 ingredients are now present, and I think that we're at a place now where we can really start continuing to win by winning, as Claire says.
Excellent. Really, really interesting, actually. And Tim, from your perspective,
Thanks for the question. So I've had 30 years in government. I would say that the reason that government leaders that I talk to seem to be ready to truly transform is because of what's happened in the last 4 years. Let's face it, the last 4 years have been the strangest years that we've all spent in government. We can't underestimate the significance of COVID hitting government. We were right in the center of the storm, right? And the challenges that created for government agencies just to keep the lights on and be able to serve the citizenry. Working with one state, Midwest state, saw a 950% increase in requests for service for unemployment in 1 week. And their system crashed. And it was taking 18 weeks to get a check out. Imagine if you're newly unemployed, you have a mortgage and your mom's in the hospital. You can't wait 18 weeks, right? So 3 themes have emerged during COVID. One is government surprised themselves with how quickly they could innovate. And wanted to pick up on Andy's comment about we weren't really ready. Well, during COVID, we got ready in a hurry, right? And we surprised ourselves with how quickly we could innovate. This stuff isn't that hard. We did a lot of stuff in the heat of the moment. Maybe we didn't prioritize security and governance as high as we should, so now we want to maintain that level of innovation, right? It's like a drug, but put governance and security around. The other piece, the other theme that emerged is this idea of citizen trust, okay? You could say that citizens trust their societal institutions in general and government in particular less than they did 4 years ago, right? And part of that is because for many citizens, it was the first time they were forced to interact with their government up close and in an intimate way. I mean, we all get our driver's licenses and pay our taxes, but how many of us had to request for a benefit? In Connecticut, my state, 22 separate social services agencies. And because I'm a government geek, I went out. It took me an hour to navigate around to try to figure out what benefit I might be entitled to, another half hour to figure out the form I have. I mean, give me a break. So those are the two themes. Now, what I'm seeing is government leaders, all the people I talk to, they're worried about future shocks. We don't know what the next big thing is going to be, but there's this foreboding sense that these black swan events are happening more often and they're having greater impact.
Yeah.
Supply chain disruption, cyber attacks. Who had secret Chinese spy balloons on their bingo card for last year? Who had on their bingo card the cargo ship slamming into the Francis Scott Key Bridge? I don't know if anyone saw the news today. There was a widespread 911 outage this morning. Yeah. And they think it might have been a cyber thing. Yeah. We don't, who knows what it's going to be? Godzilla, right? But we know we need real flexibility, real agility to be able to respond to whatever it is. And that requires true transformation.
Yeah, you're right. And there are still barriers and challenges I think we've got to sort of face. And Traci, to get your perspective on what you're seeing in the work that you do across government around that space.
So I'm going to curse at you and say a 4-letter word when it comes to barriers, and that is procurement. Another one, hiring. Raise your hand if you've ever cursed at either one of those processes in government. But also, I think the challenges and the barriers are looking at the risk that government has to take on, and it's still applying the same models and methods towards looking at that risk. And so what happens is that a lot of times, instead of there being a maybe we can do it this way, there's usually what I call the wall of no. Yeah. And that it's stronger than red tape, actually. It is the no. And the no comes from not understanding the technology, it's not understanding the application, it's being afraid to let people talk to end users. And that usually is a big thing that comes in. And, oh, we need to talk to the end user. Why would you need to talk to them? Yeah. Like, we know all the answers here from the program team, but we actually need to, inform them that this is going to be a change. Why? Why do we have to? That was kind of that traditional method, and we've seen that shift so much over the past 10 years and stuff. And I think, in 2014, I sat here in this room actually talking about the procurement training program that we were getting ready to launch at U.S. Digital Service in conjunction with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. And today, this is the Digital IT Acquisition Professional Program. There's over 2,000 buyers that have been trained in this, and they are learning digital service methodologies, they are learning how to apply this stuff, and it's really going to them and saying, you need to become an expert in this market because you need to understand the complexities of purchasing it. It's not just the same as purchasing a table, it is really in depth and looking at that. Hiring is doing the same thing right now, and they've launched a challenge similar to the DITAP one for improving and bringing in more qualified people into the government, because we've seen where the ebb and flow of government happens, where you outsource your technical expertise and then you insource it and then you outsource it. And there's always going to be that need for people on both internal and external that have that. With the Digital Services Coalition, it's a nonprofit trade association which represents small to mid-size to large companies that are doing the digital service work. And from over the last 3 years, we've seen where 62% of the contracts that have been awarded have been done on the fixed price method. And now we heard in the last session a little bit of like, why is that bad? That's not good. But in the way that we've looked at this process and are actually buying a repeated process for the delivery of working product and separated the service concepts from the technical requirements of the contract and saying repeatedly deliver this, that 62% of delivered functionality under the fixed price is delivered to the agencies, delivered functionality. It's not just a best effort in time, which we sometimes get into the problem of under the waterfall processes, where you might have a 4-year contract and you might not actually have a system working in 4 years. But this actually iterates and brings things into a modular way and breaking things down. So the barriers are there, and navigating that wall of no with compliance and all of that is looking at these things as the more flexible you make your system in all the systems, it's applying digital transformation concepts to all the different practices within and looking at procurement, hiring, project management, product management, customer experience, all of that, and saying, let's apply the same methods that we're doing to do the product to these processes as well.
Really interesting, actually, that in the UK we say intelligent client. How do you become an intelligent client and an intelligent buyer, and actually getting that understanding? I think I would now be the best client ever if I went back into public sector. After 30 years in public sector, I've learned more trying to sell into government than I have as a supplier, as an actual government employee. It's so important to skill up not just your digital build capability, but the teams running contracts, procurements, and the whole ecosystem and that partnership. Anyway, I could just sit here and ask this panel questions or just let them chat for the next 30 minutes because it is fascinating. But it's your turn now to set some challenges. So who would like to ask a question? We've got a couple of roving mics. They're not called mic. Oh, they might be, actually. That people have got on them. I know my jokes are landing really well out there. It's late, it's okay.
Don't be shy.
Come
While
on,
we're
who's got the
waiting, I
first?
just realized how embarrassed I am to show up as the same hairstyle as the other two guys.
Right.
I resemble that remark, Karen.
Now, come on, you can really go hard on this panel because they know a lot. Any questions? Because I'm going to start talking about COVID, if not. Are you?
Let me pick up while you're looking for. You keep
Yeah.
looking for questions.
Okay, sorry,
Pick
the
up something that Traci said. I think the procurement piece has come up a number of times, and we've talked about the procurement model being set up for things as opposed to digital services and so forth. But I think we even need to take one step further back, and so from the Canadian digital service perspective, one of the things, and I've been there for 4.5 months, so I haven't had a chance to break it too badly yet. But give me a minute, and I'll come back next year and tell you how we're doing. But not everything needs to be a procurement, and I think that's part of the model as well that we need to think about with government. Now, listen, there's things that have to be procured. We're talking about large cloud contracts. We're talking about large software contracts. Absolutely, but certainly in my 25 years in the federal government and working in different domains such as justice, libraries, science departments, a lot of the success that I've had in building out teams to deliver on those mandates that I was given was through creating partnerships, both nationally and internationally. And I mean, you all are doing that here today, and thinking about how we exchange with other jurisdictions that are having the same challenges that we are. They have already, conquered them. But I think, quite often, like when we're looking to get talent in our space, we think about hiring public servants and bringing them in a very formal way. Creating partnerships with organizations that have the domain experts and getting a track to be able to bring them into government, letting them be where they are in terms of the organizations, but creating the partnerships to deliver on an outcome, which we've, again, talked about a number of times at this forum. That, to me, I think, is something that we need to explore, because a lot of times in government, we move quickly to procurement and then get really, downtrodden with the process. I think we have to ask ourselves before, is this actually a procurement, or is this a different type of relationship that I'm trying to structure? Now, that may cause another issue, and that's probably something that's worth hacking as well. Because I think a lot of those opportunities are out there, but we don't go after them.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that a little bit as well. So you asked, the original question is, what are some of the barriers, right? I'd like to pick up on a theme that I think your Canadian friend made in the earlier session, which is, I think we talk about this the wrong way, right? It reminds me of the days of big data. Anyone lived through the days of big data? I had so many, I had so many conversations where the person would say, give me some big data.
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, why? What are you trying to do? And then it became AI, right? Now it's like, give me some AI.
Let's get blockchain.
And it's
Blockchain, yeah.
you need to talk about it in the vein of what are you trying to do from a mission and business point of view? You're trying to better serve the citizen. You're trying to deliver better services, across the board. So that's one thing. The other barrier I see is there's this concept, and I think you're kind of picking up on it, but I would take it a little differently, which is, look, do not go out and build the intergalactic cloud hybrid AI thing and expect you're going to get all kinds of transformation, everyone's going to be happy, like the big procurement, right? This is a journey, not an event. And what you need to do is take a deliberate approach where you create some sort of governance council, you get where you really get to digital transformation is where you have folks from different silos, organization coming together on a common problem, come up with a roadmap of 5 or 6 use cases that you're really going to nail, lightweight, low trauma solutions to real tactical pain points, and hit them hard, one after the other. Move quickly, fail fast, iterate. The great irony here is that while what we're talking about is transformational and revolutionary, the path to value is iterative and evolutionary.
Can I just say tactically one thing that Paul said for the federal folks in the room? I think we very much underutilize a number of different things that are available to us that we have found really useful. A co-sponsorship agreement, a gratuitous services agreement, the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, the federally funded research and development centers. I said GRATSA, co-sponsorship agreement, cooperative agreement. Yeah, like all of those are ways to work with people on things that we do not use that much. Yeah. So if you ever want to talk about any of those things, please reach out to our team.
Somehow we got to raise the awareness on that, really. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're looking at doing as well, this is mostly for developers, is put together a bit of a developer's toolkit. We've got 6 or 8,000 developers in the government of Canada that all work in silos. But unless they were sitting here, they wouldn't, and not from the U.S., but they wouldn't know. Like, so they need to know that those opportunities and those vehicles and venues are there, because otherwise everything looks like a procurement, because that's the path that I know, right?
This takes up, we've got a question in the audience.
We talked long enough? Brilliant.
We're vamping, you know?
Hi there. I happen to know a number of people on that stage, which is so wonderful.
I didn't realize I'd met you before. Sorry. I've done it. Sorry, I'm apologising to the mic guys, but I've hit my mic again. Sorry. I'm the worst panelist ever.
So for those who don't, people in my life who don't know government, they see government as one place, right? And those of us who work in government know that it's a bunch of different organizations, right? And within those organizations, a bunch of different organizations, even still. I'm wondering, in terms of the collaboration piece that you just talked about, how often can we, or do we, or might we actually work together on when I know amazing things happening at VA? How often does VA share those resources or like lessons learned with the next group that might be a decade behind?
Yeah.
Or that might be 5 years behind, or might want to know in order to share those learnings.
Excellent. Let's get Lauren. I think that's a great one for you to come in on, if that's all right. Thank you, and we'll go to you next.
I mean, I think we're trying and would take any opportunity. The places where I'm really interested in collaboration is where we can be looking toward some of the outcomes that we're trying to deliver for our users. So for example, if they're trying to apply for healthcare right now, right, there's a ridiculously long form, and I really appreciated our previous panel who asked, like, why are there forms, right? But there's a ridiculously long form which could allow us to go to CMS, allow us to go to IRS, could allow us to go to a couple different agencies and collect all of this data. So it just is hey, veterans, do you want health care? Yes, no? And that's it. That's the question, right? That is the only question. We have to ask that question because we don't want to mess with their taxes or the Affordable Care Act. But it becomes that simple. And so that's the place where I'm really interested in collaboration. I think we're happy to talk about lessons learned all day long, and I think we still have a lot to learn.
I'm going to go to Traci now. I think that's really interesting, actually, a number of citizen activities that actually they want access to multiple services. Then it's their need, not a department need. It's fascinating. We see that in ex-offenders and prisoners in the UK. Traci, any perspective on that?
Yeah, I think too that we in the government tend to think of ourselves as an insular organization as well, and do not leverage the other areas of the commercial industry that are also trying to do this. Banks, airlines, stores that are trying to get people to enjoy their digital experience, not only online, but also, we come to conferences, but it's government to government and government to government industry. I think we should be going to these other events and trying to figure out how to cross the market and having a conversation where more people can actually understand that government is trying to do this approach, but also learning from other people who are just doing the same thing as well, whose main mission is not the tech, but to service a certain part of the population. And in that, we are just as big of a consumer of what other people are doing as we are trying to come up with the ways. But we don't have to create government things for ourselves to do. We can leverage what is already happening and happening a lot faster than we are able to get to it. So where we are behind the curve, we should be looking to see who is ahead of that. And that's looking at that market from not the market and research of who we're going to hire as a contract on that, but what are they doing to improve their own world? How did they do that? And then start talking those conversations of sharing.
And that, yeah, that's brilliant. That's why we're here today, and that it's fascinating to see that. I think this morning there was a comment, we need to collaborate and work together. But sometimes we don't, and that's whether it's internally or globally or whichever, it's how do you open up those opportunities. It's fascinating. Now the lady there had a question.
Yes. So you had mentioned the idea of strategy and sort of having the whole discussion around your stakeholders, et cetera, and paraphrasing what you said, and a digital transformation effort, and then isolate and go into the various projects. The isolation and going into the projects from the point of the strategy and the sort of planning, that's where there's a gap. Right? Because the minute you go into the project, so I'm asking the question, how do you fill that gap? Because the minute you go into the implementation part, it gets technical, it gets procurement-oriented and delivery-oriented and boundaries put in.
Okay, and I think Andy's going to come in on that
I'd like
one.
to answer that question. I think everything worth doing starts with the bold vision. Okay? I talk to so many people in government who say digitizing paper forms is our vision. That's not a vision. Okay? a vision, no, truly, I don't mean to be facetious. A vision is collect information faster and more simply. Right. Okay? So that rallies every single silo, program office, component, sub-agency in the organization. And then you go out to your customers, right? Because we hold the mirror up to ourselves in government, right? Systems migration and going to the cloud and data breaches. Turn the mirror around, go to the customers, and say, how would you like to provide information? Because that's the core thing the government's doing, collecting information to provide a service or a benefit. And they're going to tell us different things. For our older populations, like at Social Security, they want to call someone because they feel a greater sense of trust with a human being collecting the information. And so when I was at the White House, we worked on helping Social Security get telephonic signatures, which I didn't know existed, stood up. So they're investing in their call center, not digitizing a 20th century transactional medium, which is a paper form. We also, let me give you an example at my new agency, the U.S. Department of the Interior. Our Fish and Wildlife Service offers duck stamps and fishing licenses to go fishing and hunting. Why would we spend millions of dollars digitizing these very simple information collections when actually offering them at Walmart in the bait and tackle department is where the customer goes right before he or she is going to go onto a fish or wildlife refuge to go fishing or hunting? So the vision, in my opinion, is what enables all of those hypotheses and assumptions to be documented, and then you go out and validate it. And then we go talk to our procurement experts on actually, if we digitize these 5 forms, we would have a transformational impact on both the business and how we adjudicate that information collection request and on our customers. Because we're gonna realize that vision of it's faster and it's done in a more simple way.
And that's incredibly insightful, I think, as well, because that allowing the teams and on the ground, the experts on the ground, to engage with users
at the
and
lowest
customers.
levels.
And they'll tell you how to solve the problem. Government is very good at saying this is what we need to, yes. And that, this has been a great couple of days for me because it's so consistent. I might speak a different language from a day-to-day, but we are definitely solving the same problems. Question over here, please. Mike over here.
Hi, Steve Fair, NASA Langley. Hey, we're having, I think we're all sharing struggles with the accelerated rate of technology. Things are changing a lot faster than our processes can support. We're running into issues, but by the time it's through the cybersecurity accreditation, everything else, the products are already obsolete. How have you actually gotten the acceleration to reduce that latency, to go through these processes, to implement safe, secure, effective software, but get it more quickly?
That's a great question, and I bet you all want to answer that question. Who does want to answer this? Because I know you all. It'd be good to hear from you, Paul, actually.
I think one of the ways is a little bit of what we're talking about in terms of not doing the intergalactic piece. I do think it's, and we're doing this with a couple of the new programs we have within the Canadian federal government, is build it, show it, and then continue to iterate through. Getting that mindset and the culture of It's not simply going to be, you know, a 2-year build and then there's going to be a thing. Because not only from, you know, the outside, you know, the service perspective, you're probably going to miss the mark for 24 months. But you're also, it's as important as you show what right looks like from a process perspective, and so as it is from an outcome perspective. And what I mean by that is, and we're using this from a Canadian digital service perspective, is we want to demonstrate what right looks like, not what good looks like, but what right looks like in terms of creating a digital services organization. Everybody is dragging along legacy. We've only been in existence for 6 years. And Aaron Snow, who's I think somewhere in here, was the, you know, the instigator of this, and thankfully so. But you know, one of the things that we need to do is, sure, we're putting out platforms that are composable and departments can use, and we're putting out these government-wide platforms that not everybody has to do things. But what in my mind is also as important is, how do we show how things get built, how things get funded, how things get implemented? And that covers the gamut. So we'll be talking about getting an authority to operate. It's not something that it can't take 6 months, because the iteration of your next product is going to happen 3 times in that 6 months. So you bring your security folks in, you bring your procurement folks in and say, how do we do this in a much more iterative fashion than in the way that we've done it in the past?
Amira, I was going to see if Amira wants to just add in. I'll come to you then, Tim. Anything to add on that, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, tying 2 thoughts together here from Andy and Paul. So it is critical to have a vision, right? But then act very tactically within that vision. So you have your vision, you say, okay, what are the steps that are going to take us to get there? And that's where you get to the rapid iteration, where you're building trust. And the trust word here to me is so key, because it's not only trust with your customer, the citizen, it's trust with your partners across the silos who are investing with you to do this project. And when you iterate quickly and you do an app or you do some new service delivery and they go, wow, that worked, I want to do the next one. You're building trust and competence and skill as you go. And then a lot of those issues become less acute, I guess is my point.
Okay.
I would also say, just to finish, maybe close on that also applies as we think about, you know, getting money from the system, which again, traditionally is not set up to do that. But you have to build in your model to say, you know, thanks for the $2 million to do, or the $200,000 to get started. I'll be back in 6 months, and I may tell you we failed, and I'll tell you why. But if we're actually going well, I'm going to ask for the next 200,000 or the next 2 million, and you have to build that, you know, mindset and create those expectations, because the expectation of the system is that they gave you money, and we don't want to hear from you again.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I'll give you an example
I think, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'll give you an example of what I mean by rapid iteration.
You've lost control.
I'm sorry. You're gonna whack me with a ruler. I'll make this one quick. I'll make this one. So just a live example.
This is what I've got to face.
NHS in Scotland, actually. This goes back to COVID, but I think it's a really good one. They're rolling out the vaccine, and as you know, rolling out the vaccine is very complicated. There's a supply chain issue, there's obviously the provider issue, and who's gonna pay for the whole thing. Plus, you have to keep track of which vials of vaccine are going where and into which arm for adverse events and that sort of thing. And they wanted to hit so we wanna automate this process. The use case they started with is with at-risk parts of the population, elderly, infirm. And they rapidly rolled out a quick app, took 6 weeks, and they scheduled the first 250,000 appointments in the first 12 hours. And within 12 weeks, they had done 2.5 million vaccinations of that population alone. 6-week project. You know what they did then? They extended it to the general population. Now they're doing it with all of their vaccines, not just COVID, but other ones. So it was boom, quick hit, holy cow, look, this actually works. I want more of that. We're going to expand.
Cool. I think, we could have a whole session on COVID and the impact, and the pandemic platform that they built as well is the vaccine platform. Lauren, did you want to come in on that one before I go for a last question? We need
Sure.
time, right?
Just a quick thing. I think one of the things that we constantly fight against is that our fiscal year budgets are change averse, right? We are talking about what we want to do in 2030, and what that means is that we're just like, well, so like what every part of the agency does is says, well, we're just going to we'll just like fund this program again and again and again. So one of the things that we've really tried to do is take advantage of things like TMF and supplemental funding, anything like that where we can do that sort of demonstration of a quick win. We're going to get a vaccine, like a way for veterans to say, I want a vaccine, and then 2 days later get that vaccine, right? And we need to be able to do that kind of thing quickly. So wherever and whenever possible, we can like demonstrate progress so that we can get those, the idea of progress baked into our 2027 and 28 fiscal year plans.
That's great. Right, time for one last question. Has anybody got a nice killer question to that gentleman over there? Quick, if you can make it really short, the question, and succinct, because we've got about 4.5 minutes and I'll get into trouble if I overrun.
Paul, I heard that the Canadian government had leveraged AI to, I guess, rewrite or update the federal procurement regulations into plain language. Not sure if that, can you comment on that?
Next question.
In the broader, run out of time.
So I wasn't aware that it used AI. So I mean, let's be clear. We've all been using AI for decades or over a decade easily. And I think there's a gentleman in the room somewhere here who's our chief data officer who's responsible for putting out the guidelines in terms of how generative AI and in fact algorithmic impacts or algorithmic tools are used. And I think we were one of the first countries to come out with an algorithmic impact assessment and how these tools can be used. You run through a bit of a process and it says, okay, like, yeah, you can use this, but if you're affecting citizens' benefits, well, there's a different path you need to go down. So we've got some very robust guidance and tools in that space. I don't know specifically if it was used for that. It would not surprise me in terms of getting to plain language. I think we all agree we could use more of that, certainly with a lot of the government ease that we have. But I don't know specifically in that case, but it would not surprise me.
Yeah, cool. Anything from you, Amira, on that one? I don't know if anybody's got an AI.
I think it was a specific Canadian question.
Yeah. Oh, so we haven't done that in the US.
Answer it, so
Sorry, apologies. Yeah.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah, it gave me a great recipe for food, ChatGPT, which is probably not the best thing to use it for. It's my technical competence. So we've got about 2.5 minutes left. Is there a final question? Because if not, I'm just going to ask. At the back there. Thank you. I think we might have squeezed an extra few minutes in this because I didn't start the timer at the start of the meeting, so I'm following the timer.
Can we just check before? Is it for me or is it for someone else? Because if it's for me, we're done.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't ask Paul a question.
Okay. So, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Jeremy Zittimer, U.S. Digital Service. So to everybody but Paul. So the language that we use signifies what we care about, what we want to work on, and what we don't want to work on. So I'm thinking about the terms user experience, customer experience, digital experience, life experience. Each one of those implies something that is in scope and out of scope. We talked about how digital first, but not digital only. What does that mean when we call digital experience our priority? So what are your thoughts on what kind or category of experiences we should be focusing on as we try to meet the holistic needs of our nations in the digital age?
I think that's an Andy or Amira answer.
Well, I was just going to say, I can speak to, there was a very deliberate choice to use the word customer 6 years ago because there was lots of different things going around, right? I think there's different, and words mean different things to different people. When I first came into government, I was a social scientist, economist that was looking at, we were working on a team that was doing social and behavioral sciences, and the term, when we said the word research, it was very different than when a technologist was saying the word research. And so that was something that probably took us 6 months to figure out, and which is why when someone would be yeah, we did user research, and then economists on our team would be you talked to people for 5 days. I spent 6 years doing my research. And so I think that was things to figure out. And when we landed on the word customer, we deliberately did not pick citizen because there's a lot of people that we interact with that are not citizens. Resident was something that was more hooked to where you lived, and cities use the word resident a lot. Consumer was very like private sector-y, but customer felt like a bridge because we were also trying to like change this culture that like it was different than private sector experience, and we were trying to level up and say like there should no longer be a gap between expectations of what you expect of a government service interaction and with a private sector interaction, and so it was sort of like a leveling. And then user, interestingly, we had a lot of like healthcare folks, and user had a connotation associated with it that we also kind of wanted to shift from in a different world, right? Like in tech, like user just meant someone who was like interacting with your product. And so I think we also moved from customer service, which is like what everyone sort of said too, which is very much like issue resolution, to like this, again, like maturation to like it's the overall experience that someone is having and trust and relationship with the brand. So I can speak to that.
Oh yeah,
that's why we picked customer experience.
And it was brilliant. And that was also, I think, ending with a discussion about how we define our users is probably the best way to end any, because it's all about the people we're trying to serve. And we've definitely toyed with that in the UK, exactly the same challenges. And I think it's amazing work. So that's it. And that, I think we overran, but it was a great panel. Thank you, panel. Thank you so much. I've had the best day. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.